Money influences politics, but in more ways than you might think. With the rise of super PACs, outside groups, and campaign fundraising, this election cycle is expected to set new record highs. But as we've been seeing the last few weeks, there are signs the impact of money in campaigns may be reaching its limits. So, David, why is Washington so obsessed with fundraising?
Well, because there's the belief that, in fact, if you have more money, you're going to win the election. And the media in particular uses this as a criteria in terms of evaluating where campaigns are. Yes, you occasionally have surveys, but they really do look who's got more money, again, based on that belief that whoever's got more money will win. And the campaigns understand that. And so they put a lot of emphasis on fundraising. And as a result, you have this dialogue that begins to emerge between the media and the campaigns. Now, having said that, the thing that people need to realize is money is a resource, not an outcome. It can generate activity, but it takes serious, good execution of campaign activities to, in fact, get to that
Mhm.
outcome. And a good example, and I know you want to talk about this, is what Kamala Harris did back in 2024.
Well, Kamala Harris' campaign had over $1 billion to spend, and yet they still lost. And they lost to a candidate, President Trump, who had a negative brand image, as Kamala Harris also had a negative brand image. So not even $1 billion could solve that problem for her. So every cycle, it's like we think we've seen the most money that we've ever seen, and yet every cycle goes a bit farther. This fall, we're expected to see a new high. An estimate from Ad Impact shows that we're expected to see over $11 billion in campaign ads, which is a significant increase from the last midterm election in 2022, when there was about 8.9 billion. So that's a significant step up. But in the last couple of weeks, we've seen some very interesting examples of money in campaigns having limited effects. David, I think you have some examples for us.
I
For
do.
sure.
But before that, I want to get back to Kamala Harris for just a second because you laid out an important thing. Here she spent $1 billion and she ended up with a negative image in terms of the electorate, more unfavorables than
Mhm.
favorables. And think about that. For $1 billion, if she had gotten to 52% favorables, that would have made a significant difference
That's right.
potentially. But instead, they spent $1 billion and somehow they ended up where she had this negative image. What I'm going to show you is there are three recent Democratic primary elections that I want to go through. And let me bring this up. So what you're looking at here is Senate primaries in Florida, Minnesota, and Michigan. And I'll get to Texas in a second. And what you have here is the person on top with the W next to it is the person who won the primary. And then you have the person who lost bottom. And then to the right of that, you see how much money did they spend on advertising? Let's start with Florida. Nixon spent 60,000, while Vindman spent 2,200,000. That was a 37-to-1 ratio advantage for Vindman. Yet Nixon won by 12 points. I mean, that's just a huge
Mhm.
amount, given the fact that she had virtually no advertising. I mean,
And
in this case,
she was the socialist candidate, and Vindman was the candidate that everyone in Washington assumed was going to win easily.
and so the idea that she spent only $60,000 in one statewide in Florida really is a pretty remarkable outcome. Well, let's take a look at another state where with a similar dynamic. Flanagan, who again was the progressive candidate, and Craig, who was the establishment candidate. What you see is Flanagan spent 3.3 million and Craig spent almost 14 million. And in this particular case, this isn't just simply how much the campaign spent. This includes the amount of money that was spent by other outside groups on their behalf. There was a 4-to-1 advantage for Craig. And even more so than the margin in Florida, Flanagan won by 20 points. Right here. So here it is. Flanagan got outspent 4-to-1, and yet she won by 20 points. Then we go to the sort of race that kind of began to engage all of this, and this is El Said versus Stevens. El Said, the progressive, and Stevens, the sort of establishment candidate. And what you see here is El Said spent 5.2 million, where Stevens spent 52 million. That was a 10-to-1 advantage.
Yeah.
Given the dynamic of this race, this was much closer, but still, Said won by 1 point.
Yeah. And to
Even though
clarify,
he
it
was
was Stevens, either her campaign or on her behalf.
Yeah, no, again, same dynamic
Yeah.
as Minnesota. It was money that she spent or was spent on her app, and so she had this huge margin, 10-to-1 margin, and so had still managed to pull this off. The last race is a Republican one, and just to give you a sense, it's not just one party that sees this occurring. And this is in Texas, where you had Cornyn, the incumbent senator, being challenged by the Republican Attorney General in Texas, Paxton. And what you see is that Paxton spent 8.2 million while Cornyn spent almost 60. And again, to your point, these are people who are spending on Cornyn's behalf as well. So you had a 7-to-1 ratio. And here's an amazing number. Paxton won this race by 28 points. And so you're looking at some of these races where the person who lost had this huge advantage, 7-to-1 in terms of Paxton, 4-to-1 in terms of Craig, 37-to-1 in terms of Vindeman. I mean, just these huge margins. Yet they got crushed. Again, looking at Cornyn losing by 28, looking at Craig losing by 20. I mean, so the obvious question that emerges out of this, okay, so what was happening in terms of the advertising?
Yep.
And what this tends to say is you can have a large quantity of advertising, but that doesn't produce a win.
Given these numbers, what is all this buying? What's this all this going towards these ads?
Well, I mean, there's a sense that volume works, and at some level it does. But what this also reflects is if you're not saying things and talking to individuals and putting content and messaging on the air that engages people, you can spend all the money you
Mhm.
want. And what this means is those four campaigns just simply they had volume, but they didn't have the content.
Yep. Well, you wrote a very thought provoking column in Roll Call a while ago, and it was called Anger Has Been the Drug of Choice for Our Political System for Far Too Long. And as part of that, you highlighted the effect of political ads in negative campaign discourse and just the overall negative political environment that we're in today.
What was behind that piece was that what you've seen for decades is political ads from both sides have been designed to stoke emotion or anger. Positive messages or ads are usually treated as a waste of time. Again, a lot of consultants say it's the emotion
Mhm.
of anger to really drive people's engagement. There are three things that sort of assist in making this happen. The first one is negative ads are easier to find funders for. You have a lot of people who are willing to spend significant amounts of money because they are upset about an issue or a particular candidate and they want to drive a point home. And so these tend to be attack ads. And so that money is there, and a lot of campaigns just simply go and use that resource. Other dynamic is that it's a lot easier to produce negative ads because you're typically coming up with one thing that this person did wrong, whether it's personal or whatever, as opposed to really thinking through. So, how am I going to get the economy moving forward? As opposed to look at this horrible vote this person made, and look at what they said in terms of issue X or cultural dynamic Y. And so that tends to be easier. And a lot of campaigns, the first key document that's produced to figure out what they're going to do is actually the opposition research done on their opponent. Then the third element of this is, quite frankly, the media loves attacks, right?
Mhm.
Because this is the conflict. It helps them get eyeballs. And by the way, if they're personal attacks, that's even better because now you can sort of create a whole level of engagement between the two of them and watch them go back and forth in terms of each other sort of really attacking each other.
Well, and to your point about the anger aspect, anger is the point. And in many cases, there is a stated goal of wanting people to be angry, and that's what the whole strategy is.
And Myra,
So,
you and I have seen situations
mhm,
where we've seen consultants stand up in front of audience
right,
and say, your job is to make people angry.
right. Well, it's having an unfortunate effect on our political system in many ways. A couple weeks ago, we did an episode about the rise of independents nationally and in the competitive presidential states, with more voters not identifying with either political party. And the political discourse, this anger and negative ads coming from both sides is a contributor to that. It's also it's leading to diminishing confidence in our political institutions like Congress, and it's having a negative impact on both parties' ability to find quality candidates who are willing to run for public office, who wants to put themselves and their families through a negative campaign and be subjected to horrible ads. So it's having a detrimental effect in many ways. But I think the more important aspect of what money in politics is doing now is what it's incentivizing in the current system. And it's really causing more time, the way that members use time, more time fundraising rather than legislating. We've heard members say this on both sides that it really bothers them.
And in many cases, what you see for many members, particularly leadership members, is a lot of time is spent on fundraising over legislating, and that's particularly true for leadership. And again, this is on both sides, and I would argue that, and members would probably agree that the one number that they know is the amount of money that they've been asked to contribute to the overall political campaign fund for their conference. And it's a number not only they know for themselves, but for
Mhm.
everybody else, because there's everybody else sort of meeting that responsibility. And so what you see is the significant amount of time that legislators find themselves involved having to do fundraising as opposed to
Mhm.
legislation. And this is where I go back to the concept, not to, but to repeat this, because I think this is an important point to drive home. The money is a resource, not an outcome. And so part of what these legislators are dealing with is here's this dynamic that they have to make sure happens for campaigns. Yet the reason they're there is to legislate. And it's, again, it's just this dynamic. How do they balance it? And unfortunately, you see this heavy emphasis again on the fundraising side. And for consultants, the focus on winning or losing becomes secondary to raising money because again everybody's belief it's money that just
Mhm.
wins, and as we just saw in those 4 Senate races, money was clearly not the answer. Yet you see these huge sums being raised, and you can imagine just the time spent to be able to pull all that
Yep, and
together.
the time that members are having to spend on fundraising is contributing to the retirements that we're seeing. We're seeing good members on both sides who say, I'm not being able to make progress on the issues that I care about. I'm spending all my time fundraising, so I'm gonna this is all there is, then I'm gonna do something else with my life. And unfortunately, we're seeing good people on both sides leave in part because of that. Now, in terms of the focus on fundraising, we see many examples of campaigns that raise so much money that they don't know how to spend it. And Kamala Harris campaign is a good example of that, where they had so much coming in, and there were people on that campaign who said we couldn't even think of enough ways to spend it. Yet when they lost, there was an interesting quote from the DNC autopsy thing that you found about what they were saying in terms of the impact of money in that race.
This is the revised version of the DNC autopsy. After the first version that had been let out, which was incomplete, the author wanted to come back and sort of flesh out what, in fact, he had really thought through. In it, he got to a very interesting conclusion. He said this: Democrats can design and implement campaigns to do more to regain trust. Interesting and important
Mhm.
dynamic. But he said, only if elected leaders, candidates push the strategists to think outside status quo boxes and silos. And then he came up with a really interesting conclusion, given the work that he had gone through.
Mhm.
Democrats do not have a money problem. It's a strategy problem. And this gets to, again, let's go back to those 4 races. The losing candidates did not have a money problem. They
Mhm.
clearly had a strategy problem.
Right. Well, if we've been seeing these examples in the last couple of weeks of the money having limited returns in campaign success, does that signal potential change in the political system?
No, I mean, you've looked at this over the years as well. The status quo serves most of the political system, a financial model that is working for the
Mhm.
current system. Voters at the moment are the disruptive element to that,
That's
right?
right.
Again, to the status quo, as they were in 2024 in the presidential race in terms of Kamala Harris, to show how ineffective $1 billion can be. I mean, when you think about that, it's just a staggering number to do so poorly with. Yet on the Democratic side, this cycle, there are clear examples, again, like we just went through, of the candidate with overwhelming money of losing. The question is whether candidates or elected officials begin to notice this so they can change how they do their campaigns and interact with voters during the election.
Well, some very interesting developments. And I think if these trends continue, campaigns are going to have to take notice and adjust because voters seem like they are demanding more. They've raised the bar on campaign content and ads that they will find believable, authentic, and persuadable. Ads are going to have to adjust. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see billions of dollars going down the drain. And voters will have the final say on this. Thanks everyone for joining us this week. Be sure to check out our website at winstongroup.net. Also, for more on change coming to the political system, check out our recent episode on the clash of Mamdani socialists and the Democratic establishment. We'll see you next time for more discussion points.